Hi everyone, you're watching the Asian American Herald, a news media network featuring the Asian Americans across the United States. My name is Shruti Natanmai, and I'm a student at the Fashion Institute of Technology, writer, and creative who was born and raised in the Capital Region. This afternoon, I'm super excited to speak with Bobbie SIngh Allen, the first Sikh-American woman to serve as mayor for the city of Elk Grove in California. Thank you so much for joining me on today's show, and welcome.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you, Shruti, for the introduction and invite.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you. So I'd like to start by asking you to take a minute to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell our viewers about your background and where you grew up, some of your interests.
Sure. First of all, thank you all for joining the show today and to hear a little bit more about me. My name is Bobbie SIngh Allen. I was proudly born in India. I moved to this great country when I was 4 years old. I come from the state of Punjab. I am a Sikh-American, and I've lived here ever since then. And, you know, as you can see in my background, it's very political. I've been involved in politics my entire life. I've had an interest in politics. And when I was young, in high school, I was involved in many campaigns, and that's really where the bug started and the interest to serve in public office, but really to be involved in the political process. Very importantly, I grew up in the Central Valley here in California. I grew up in Turlock before I moved to the Elk Grove area, which is just outside of Sacramento. It's a city of almost 200,000, so it's a decent sized metropolis here. And you know, as South Asians, as Indian Americans, we really have not had strong representation, particularly when I was growing up. I was one of the only Indians that was involved in politics and in the political process. I'm proud to say we are seeing a lot more representation, a lot more of that next generation getting involved in politics. And I see a number of staff members at the Capitol. And of course, we're seeing a record number of Indian Americans run for public office, which is great because representation matters. We need to see ourselves in our elected representatives. And, you know, in our region, so I'm the first directly elected woman Sikh mayor in the United States. So I didn't know that was the history that was going to be made when I started this journey, but history was made, and I was very honored with that. But my interests, I love traveling. I love politics, as you can imagine. I was a proud delegate for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and I was elected for that. And I was also elected to be a Biden delegate. So we're very happy with the outcome of this last election. You know, outside of politics, I've got a wonderful family. I've got two sons who are now in college here in California. My parents also live in my community. I have a younger brother who's a small business owner who lives in Elk Grove as well. I still have a number of relatives in India and abroad, not only in the United States and California, but in England and Canada as well. So for those of you watching, hello.
No, that's incredible. So what kind of drew you to that political process when you were younger?
Sure. So, you know, in high school, my history teacher asked a number of students to be involved locally, that you can see, you know, she taught us that you can see the direct influence that you can have on a campaign. Mm-hmm. And so she challenged a number of the students to get involved and to see for themselves. I, of course, volunteered, and I volunteered on a local campaign in the city I grew up in. And I just did something basic as registering voters and sharing information. But in that process, not only did I bring in more voters, just getting them registered for the first time, usually, you know, if students when they were 18 in high school, I'm getting them registered to vote, and just sharing that passion to give back and become involved and help shape your community, because you can directly see an influence of your contribution to your community. So it's been ingrained in me. It's part of the Sikh dynamic that we believe in seva, as do many communities. But you know, and seva and service can come in many ways. It's not just obviously public service. It's working in nonprofits and boards and commissions and just giving back to your community. And for me, public service was an outlet. But I got that bug in high school when I first got involved in my first campaign. And from there, I studied political science, shocking, before going on to law school. At first, my parents weren't pleased because, like all good Indian parents, they want their children to be doctors and engineers. So I placated them enough to go to law school, and I graduated from law school. But politics and public service was really where my calling was. And I worked at the Capitol for a while. I was a registered lobbyist representing just different nonprofit organizations. And the lodging industry, travel and tourism is where I've had the longest tenure in serving the hotel industry nationwide. A lot of our members are actually Indian American owners. And it's been great to be a strong voice for the hotel industry, the lodging industry. So I definitely have a passion to make sure that there is representation of all communities, but particularly Indian Americans, making sure there's representation in our policy making decisions and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, even though we're making progress, I mean, there's still long ways to go.
There's a long ways to go. I mean, so the Sikh community has been in California for over 100 years, and predominantly came here, worked on farms, and now are landowners and so forth. But to be here over 100 years and only now to be the first directly elected Sikh woman, it's sad, but it's humbling. It's an honor. But the fact that it took that long speaks volumes that we still have a long way to go. And I certainly hope I'm not the last.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So you currently are a trustee for the Elk Grove Unified School District, which is the 5th largest in California, and the state commissioner for Visit California. So can you tell us a bit more about those roles and like what you work on in those positions?
Sure. So I'll start with the Elk Grove Unified School District. It is the 5th largest, and we are one of the most diverse school districts in the country. And, what started my journey is my son was being bullied in school. And I felt the school and the school district failed me as a parent. It also failed my son for not getting the support that he needed. And it also failed the bully who clearly was lashing out and had some suffering and pain that he was going through. And that really began my journey that serving on the school board provided an opportunity to not only provide more resources to parents and students, but also to be a champion on anti-bullying initiatives. And the other second issue that propelled me to run is in my community, we still to this day have 2 unsolved murders of 2 elderly Sikh men that were gunned down. And it was an eye-opening moment that here 2 grandfathers who wore turbans could be murdered. What does that say about our society? And because my community, the Sikh-American community, we're still dealing with a lot of hate crimes, misidentity, but just the hate crimes, unfortunately, just the correlation with terrorism and some of the misinformation that our society has. It was a tremendous opportunity to teach, to educate young minds, to not only be respectful of other cultures, but to learn. Because at the end of the day, ignorance is not bliss, knowledge is. And so if we had an opportunity to educate young minds on the diversity of our community, not only on Sikh Americans, but Muslim Americans and other rich diversity. We have a number of Hindu children that go to our school district and Buddhists and, that come from all walks of life. But in education, there's a tremendous opportunity to reach those young minds, to teach tolerance, acceptance, and awareness of their community. So it was really important for me to have a voice and a platform on the school board. And I'm proud to say 8 years later, we have made tremendous progress. Not only now are we a leader on anti-bullying initiatives, but we're also a leader on ethnic studies, if you will. We'll have curriculum in the near future, but we've passed a number of resolutions that really promote the diversity of our community. It's an opportunity to teach and learn for our young students. So that's some of the, that's how the journey began and some of the impact that we've had. School board members are in charge of developing public policies, developing policies and procedures that the superintendent and the staff then implement, that goes out into our schools in public education. And so our policy making decisions are very important because it is felt then in the classrooms. So it's a responsibility that I, of course, take very seriously along with my colleagues. That's sort of the big picture stuff that school boards are in charge with. It's public education, of course. And then I'm also an elected statewide commissioner for Visit California. So we promote and market this wonderful state here in California for travel and tourism. And because I do represent the travel industry, I've served in this role for the last 4+ years as a statewide commissioner. And my other commissioners include like Disneyland and Universal Studios and some of the big corporate hotels and other theme parks and destinations. So it's been a great opportunity to have a voice in a very large platform with travel and tourism. So we work not only with all markets, but also directly with the governor's office and in other areas to promote this great state and bring those important dollars here to our community.
Yeah, definitely. So you've obviously worked in a lot of different positions, a lot of different areas of both politics, community service. So taking all of those experiences together and moving forward, what inspired you to run for mayor?
Great question. It was not a seat that I was looking to run.
Okay.
To give you some background, the current mayor, he has a pattern and a history of bullying and intimidating women. In fact, I was one of the women that was targeted by him over the course of the years, I should say. And it's really started with 2 private citizens who shared their stories, their journey. And as a Sikh woman, one of the things, as a Sikh, when you see someone being attacked, there's a responsibility that you have to stand up for them. And while I didn't stand up for myself on my own story and my dealings with him, I felt compelled to stand up and support the 2 women because of their suffering, but because they were private citizens. They weren't elected officials, and they were being attacked. And so I shared my story, but I lent support to their suffering and to let our community know that, yes, this is what we're dealing with. This is the pattern of bad behavior. So when I shared with you my journey on how I started as a school board member because my son was being bullied, 8 years later, it's that same call. I was standing up to my bully. And so for me, this journey became part of not only standing up, but speaking out. And a number of elected officials in our community, particularly Congressman Ami Bera, who's Indian American as well, he reached out to me and said, this is that moment in time that you have to step up and heed the call to run against him. And I took his advice and the advice of my family into consideration. And our community needed strong leadership. We needed to restore integrity to the seat. We needed a mayor who was a champion for our city and worked on economic recovery issues because we're all facing COVID-19 restrictions and our working families are suffering. Our businesses are suffering. We needed somebody who had a working relationship with their city council members and with regional leaders and business leaders. I bring those relationships to the table. I was endorsed by the entire city council. Our elected leaders are my assembly member, my senator, my congress member, our other regional partners. It takes those relationships to help your community. You can't do this work alone. And because I did not only bring in that network of resources, but I had tremendous amount of support because of my 8 years of leadership as a school board member. And really listening to some of the key advice from people that I value and consider mentors, I heeded that call and put my name in. And it's one of the shortest campaigns, especially in COVID. I had I had about 90 days to put together a competitive campaign. At the time, the current mayor had almost $250,000 in the bank account. And I had to overcome the financial hurdles and run a viable campaign. And we did. Not only did we get tremendous outpouring of support from the Indian American community nationwide, which I'm just so proud of because they believed in me and my message in the campaign. But we had tremendous amount of support from both labor groups and business groups, which said a lot. It meant a lot to have that strong base from both sides of the aisle. So I'm proud to say that I ran on a campaign that had the support of Democrats, Republicans, Independents, business leaders, and labor leaders. So typically a candidate doesn't enjoy that broad base of support, and I'm so humbled and proud that our campaign had that support. So it tells you kind of the need was very great,
right,
to restore integrity to the seat. And as of yesterday, we're over 10% ahead. So of course, the mayor did concede several weeks ago, but the numbers are still rolling in, and we still have over 10% to unseat an incumbent during COVID. In 90 days was definitely what would have seemed impossible. We made it possible.
Right. And I applaud you for that. Congratulations. That's really incredible that you were able to accomplish that, and you're serving as a voice for so many people. I think that's incredible. And
Thank you.
Yeah. But so tell me a bit about that moment when you realized that you had won the election. What was going through your head? What did you feel?
Yeah, so we had a very small gathering of immediate family members and the closest family and friends. My brother owns a local chain pizzeria called Steve's Pizza. And we met there. He has large screens, so we were getting election results in real time. And here in California, the polls closed at 8. And at 8:15, the county released its initial numbers. And when that initial release came, we were leading then by 11%. And typically, that ends up being sort of the pattern moving forward, even as other precincts and other votes come in, because that gap is already so wide. It's usually if you're separated by a few percentage points where you can overcome those odds as more votes come in. But 11% was just so sizable at the onset. But I didn't declare anything. I didn't want to jinx anything. But in that room, my parents are sobbing. And I could see my mom crying and my dad crying. And it just hit me at that moment that we were going to be making history. But I wasn't ready to just celebrate just then. I wanted to wait still to get more votes in, because out of respect to all the voters, wanted to make sure that their votes were counted and they were heard, even though scientifically our numbers were there. But that moment, to see the pride and joy in my parents' face and in their eyes, we take for granted the love our parents have for their children. And you just never know, how do you ever repay that? But just to see that moment, I've never seen them so happy other than perhaps when my children were born. To see that excitement. My dad still to this day is all he talks about. He's just overjoyed. And and they know how hard we all worked. It was a family affair. My dad was the one that was doing a lot of the fundraising calls and connecting with every friend and relative that we knew nationwide. And my mom, she was great. She was out walking, going door to door. Even in COVID, we weren't knocking on doors, but we were going door to door, leaving literature. And it's a big city.
Yeah.
200,000 residents. It's a big city, and she had a walking buddy already. So the walking buddy, they would walk twice a day. They did a morning shift and a late afternoon shift. My children, they built the website. They were out walking. My husband, every day he was out walking. I was out walking 5-6 days a week. So we didn't take anything for granted.
Right.
But to your question, that moment, seeing the joy in my parents' eyes, and then my children, my husband, my other family and friends, it was just a tremendous moment, very humbling, very surreal. I still pinch myself every day, like, oh my God, we actually did this.
Sure. I can imagine.
Yeah, it was a family effort. It was all hands on deck. And particularly because of COVID, you couldn't rely on your traditional campaign strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You had to do more. Because typically you can have rallies and you can have grassroots efforts and a campaign office where a lot of activity. We had to rely on a lot of people doing the work from their homes,
right?
The phone banking, and then of course walking, but coordinating it sort of remotely. And then of course we elevated, typically most campaigns locally rely on mailings to reach the voters, and then door to door. We did the door to door, but we didn't knock. We just left literature.
Mm-hmm.
We did our mailers, but we also invested a lot on digital. So we had a very strong online presence in a robust digital campaign. So not only through all social media networks, but you couldn't go on the internet without seeing locally an ad pop up with my videos, a Bobbie for Mayor message. And we had a lot of videos that were being shared. We did the phone banking, like I said, and we had a telephone town hall. So we just exhausted all efforts to make sure that we were very robust in our outreach campaign and comprehensive. And I had commercials too. I had on local cable.
Yeah, I know. And I can imagine how such restrictions with COVID really kind of forced people to be creative about their approaches and think out of the box about how to connect with people when you can't have that in-person contact, which I think was really an educational experience all around, even outside of politics, education. Like so many different industries have been kind of forced into that mindset, which is, yeah.
And I was blessed that I had a base. I have a strong base of support already just being on the school board.
Right.
And a number of students would be texting, Miss Bobbie, we voted for you, and that's just heartwarming. And of course, my children's friends, and I've given out, in the last 8 years, I've given out thousands of diplomas to students. So it was heartwarming when they reached back to me to say that they had voted for me. Very, very sweet and humbling.
Right. That's incredible. So I know we touched on this briefly before, but so as an Indian American woman yourself, do you feel that more Asian Americans should become involved in their communities or local politics? And how do you think such change and participation can be brought about?
Absolutely. I'm proud to say we do have a lot more representation than when I started my journey. So we're seeing a lot more young women in general, and even our men getting involved. So locally here, there is another young lady in a neighboring city who was elected city council. She's Indian American. And then another, consider her a younger sister, and then a brother in another neighboring city who was elected to the city council. There's a Sikh gentleman in Yuba City who was just elected board of supervisor. And then another Sikh that was appointed because of a vacancy to the board of supervisors in the Central Valley in the Modesto area. So we are seeing a record number. I think now, representation matters. And if we don't see ourselves in elected positions, then we're leaving it to others to make decisions that impact our lives and our community. And it is important to have a voice and a seat at the table. Right. And for me, not only serving on the school board, but on various boards and commissions, I've always tried to inspire other Indian Americans to not only run for public office, but it's important to be involved in your community. whether it's directly elected or not. It's serving on boards and commissions. It is being involved in your schools, in your local Rotary, showing up, sharing your thoughts and your opinions, and letting people know more about our culture, because that's how we break down those barriers, those walls. And the more mainstream society understands that our dreams and hopes and values are not unlike theirs. But that's where we have the responsibility to reach out and educate. And so we can do that in a number of ways. There's a number of ways to serve. Serve is not just being an elected, but we have a responsibility to share who we are, what we think, what we care about with others, so that those stereotypes, like I said, we can break down those barriers. So I think that we're seeing a lot more of that, but we need more. We need more representation. And so not just elected office, like I said, but most importantly, just serving in our local communities, being present.
Right. I think, yeah, as you said, we're definitely seeing more of that. So that's always a good sign.
And of course, Kamala Harris, hello.
Yes, of course. That's a big one.
That's the biggest one right now.
Of course. Yeah, that is definitely a step in the right direction. Both the fact that she is a woman of color, she's a woman, that too.
Many, the glass ceiling, not only as a woman, like you said, but then being biracial and, half Black, half Indian American. I think that's tremendous in and of itself, that we finally were able to overcome that. And you're seeing others, Governor Nikki Haley, while we don't share the same political affiliation, she's pretty accomplished in her own right. And we're seeing other, members of Congress and now running for state assembly and Senate. We have our first assembly member, Indian American here in California, Ash Kalra, and hopefully we'll see more.
Yeah, hopefully. I think we will. So I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Looking forward, what are you most excited about in regards to serving as mayor of Elk Grove?
So I ran on a platform of good governance, and that is, a mayor should work with their colleagues and their regional partners and state partners to move our city forward. So I'm looking forward to using my network of support to help improve the lives of our city, which includes economic recovery. We're dealing with COVID-19, obviously this global pandemic, and it's impacted so many of our lives, not only working families, but our businesses are suffering. And I hope to bring my area of experience and expertise, not only on the business side of things, but also in politics and government relations, and be able to help my city and not only rebuild, but sustain this horrific storm that we're under, and keep our community safe, but be able to come back strong and thrive.
Right. Well, that's incredible. And again, congratulations for all that you've accomplished so far. I look forward to seeing what you accomplish as mayor.
Please invite me back.
Of course. I think it's really inspirational what you're doing. So,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you, everyone. Namaste.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Asian American Herald. I'm Shruti Natanmai, and our wonderful guest for today was Bobbie SIngh Allen. Please send us your story ideas and look for the recording of this show on our Facebook page. Have a good evening, and thank you again.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.